Hi! I'm sure most of us have heard the term religious extremism. I'm just as sure hardly anyone has heard the term secular extremism. The claim, often made in an accusatory tone, is that more wars have been waged in the name of God than anything else. Or in the name of religion, because you see, apparently there is no need to specify what God or what religion. For one of two reasons. Either the accuser is of the ill-informed opinion that all religions are the same, or that there is no need to specify which religion they're talking about or which God they're referring to because it's obvious. The criticism that more people have been killed in the name of religion or of God than anything else is usually followed by the example of the Spanish Inquisition, the Crusades. The reason for this predictable follow-up is that this criticism is a guise for a specific hatred and rejection of Christianity, of the God of the Bible. Not of Hinduism, not of Buddhism, not of Islam, not even of Judaism. It's often obvious how a person can be a religious extremist. Not at all so obvious how a person or a society can be secular extremist. After all, the West has come through revolution after revolution, leading the Western world to believe two things. Religion is oppressive, and secularism is synonymous with liberty. For context, the 463 years or so between Muhammad's death in 632 AD, or round thereabouts, and the calling of a crusade to free the holy places in 1090 AD, was not a time of peaceful coexistence between the Muslims and the European or Byzantine Christians. Nor was it a peaceful existence for those Christians living in Muslim-occupied territories. This peace was only achieved by keeping the lowest possible profile, by paying the jizya, or the head tax, by accepting non-person status in lands that were Christian before the Muslim invaders arrived. The new millennium saw the situation go from bad to worse. In 1009, the Caliph of Egypt ordered the destruction of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. The Muslims destroyed the tomb of Jesus, the dome, and the upper parts of the church. Shocked by the destruction, this guy wasn't sure how to pronounce the name properly, don't know my Roman numerals, think it's 4. He appealed for help to go to Palestine to rebuild. His appeal fell on deaf ears. Gregory VII, on his deathbed, dreamed of forming a Christian league against Islam. He said, "I would rather risk my life to deliver the holy places than to govern the universe." What finally exhausted the patience of the European Christians, though, seems to have been the capture of Jerusalem in 1076. Pilgrimage to the holy places had become more difficult. A poll tax was imposed on visitors. Those who dared to journey were harassed, robbed, even enslaved. In 1095, Byzantine delegates emphasized the dangers facing Christendom from Muslim expansion and the hardships faced by Eastern Christians. They repeated an appeal made by Emperor Alexius to Robert of Flanders, asking him to return to the east with some knights to assist the Byzantines in their struggle with the Muslims. Towards the end of that same year, Urban II, at another council, took up the suggestion and urged Europe's Christians to take the road to the Holy Sepulchre. Let each one deny himself and take up his cross. And as the story goes, the assembly rose and everyone shouted, "God wills it." How is this not a movie? So, perspective. Muhammad died in 632 AD. It took 463 years for Europe's Christians to combine their forces and rise in defense of themselves and of their faith. Talk about patience. So there's some context for this charge against Christianity. We'll get back to that charge in a minute. As I said, we all too often hear the accusation of religious extremism. Never have I heard the accusation of secular extremism. Generally, people believe that one can become too religious. Rarely anyone believes one can become too secular. There can never be such a thing as too secular. That would be like saying a dish is too tasty. A person is too healthy. I am too rich. Whoever said that? That's the attitude towards secularism, that you can never have too much of a good thing. The reality that we're witnessing is that if a society gets too secular, it ends. This video is not necessarily a case for Christianity. It's more so an appeal to intellectual honesty. This isn't an argument that atheists are bad and religious people are good. We can all understand the consequences of secularism, of a society that is too far secular. You don't have to be a Christian. However, what I will argue is that the consequences of a secular society is due to the death of the God of the Bible as operative elements in Western society. The decline of the West is due to the cutting of our Christian roots. The point is, I'm a committed Christian. But you don't have to be to agree with the things I'm going to say, to likewise observe the things that I am observing. Last thing to emphasize, I am only talking about the Judeo-Christian world. I'm not talking about any other religious civilization. Some religious civilizations would benefit from being just a little more secular, like Iran, for example. This is about Western civilization and its Judeo-Christian heritage. I'm not talking about any other religious civilization. There is a difference between religions. All religions are not the same. All religions do not point to God. All religions do not say that all religions are the same. At the heart of every religion is an uncompromising commitment to a particular way of defining who God is or isn't, and accordingly of defining the purpose of life. Anyone who claims that all religions are the same is ignorant. Ignorant of all religions or even just the most prominent ones. But also, they caricature the religion and they insult and disrespect the religious people. Every religion at its core is exclusive. Now, people love talking about all the bad that Christianity has supposedly done. You never learn of all the good. I say supposedly because I'm a big fan of judging a thing by its highest ideals, judging it by its best, judging it by its most authentic teaching. I judge Buddhism by the teachings of Buddha, Islam by the teachings of Muhammad, Christianity by Christ. And Christianity is the world in which human rights are enshrined, where women were elevated from second-class status, where life is protected and considered sacred and precious, where there is education for all, healthcare, justice, liberty, etc. The West was formed by the Judeo-Christian worldview. That's why Margaret Thatcher said, "The West is a Judeo-Christian civilization. You drop the Judeo-Christian roots, you drop the civilization. If she can see it, so can you." Just to give one example of the atrocities that are attributed to Christianity, people are under the impression that Christianity or the Bible supports and promotes slavery. Remember slavery? Slavery used to be a normal part of the economy of every civilization ever. Africa, Asia, Mesoamerica, Native Americans, everyone had slaves. Muslims had an immense number of slaves. Some countries still, today, practice slavery in places in Africa and the Middle East. So the question isn't who had slaves or what civilization practiced slavery and how dare they. The question is who, what group of people, what civilization abolished slavery? And the answer is the Christian one, the West. Like it or not, it may not fit your narrative, but it's true. A major British thinker, Douglas Murray, wrote a work called The War Against the West. He said, "The Christian faith has an uncommonly long tradition of opposition to slavery. Saint Bathilde was a former slave herself who campaigned for the abolition of slavery in the 7th century. Saint Anselm outlawed slavery in 1102, while Archbishop of Canterbury, William Wilberforce, and the Clapham sect spent all of their energies and resources fighting to bring an end to the practice inspired in this vision by their Christian faith. There are urgent needs of people in the West and around the world that call for new generations of people willing to live lives that are in obedience to Christ, to Christ's command to love God and love neighbor. So, what are the consequences of secular extremism? Lego. Let's jump all the way back to that opening criticism. Numbers killed. Have more people been killed in wars waged in the name of God or religion? Yep. The number of people killed in that 250 period of the Spanish Inquisition was about 3,000 people. Let's put this into perspective. 3,000 deaths over a 250-year period. That's about 12 per year. That's not exactly genocidal, yet that's the example everyone shoots to. On the other hand, the greatest genocides of all human history happened in the 19th, 20th century, when religion was on the decline, and virtually every one of them was caused by a secular regime. Communism is responsible for about 100 million deaths, 100 million civilians, non-combatants. These are innocent people being starved, tortured, shot, frozen. They've had all manner of experimentation done on them. Communism is a secular doctrine. It is an anti-religion doctrine. The first thing communist regimes did in almost any country was kill the clergy. When Lenin came to power and then Stalin, the Russian Orthodox priests were murdered. Churches were either converted into some communist building or they were just straight up destroyed. That's the first thing a communist regime does. No one talks about that. I didn't learn that in school, did you? It's as if 100 million lives don't matter. Why? Because it doesn't serve the current narrative of this culture. Same argument can be made for the way that we teach kids about slavery, about the history of slavery. So it's as if these 100 million people don't matter. It's like what Stalin said, or at least it's attributed to Stalin. If one man dies, that's a tragedy. If millions die, that's only statistics. He's right. That's the problem. When you hear 100 million people died in secular regimes, it's just a number. We can't fathom 100 million deaths. We can't fathom that. We can't appreciate that amount. The human mind is not capable. So when you hear that criticism, it's just not true. It's a lie that religion or belief in God has been the major cause of wars in human history. Secularism has killed more people, and in a shorter space of time. Secularism is conducive to such atrocities. If you care about people, if you claim to care about people, why wouldn't you care about what happens when you kill the fundamental basis of the idea that human beings are precious? The preciousness of the human being is a rare ideal, and it's one that emanates from the Judeo-Christian world. If you care about people, you won't advocate secularism. You can't love secularism and love people. Secularism may be great for government, but it is not great for you and me. It is not great for human flourishing and for happiness. G.K. Chesterton, maybe, said, when people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing. They believe in anything. That is one of the greatest truths of our time. People believe the most absurd things. And even those who know that these things are absurd have been conditioned to just shut up and let it all be. Don't say a word because you don't want to come across as hateful or bigoted or whatever. So if you don't believe the absurdity, you go along with it anyway. It's so dystopian. But it's so like on the nose. It's so obvious. It's obviously straight out of a dystopian novel. Remember defund the police? What a stupid, utterly stupid, idiotic idea. What an unbelievably irresponsible idea. Defunding the police would only increase criminal behavior. It would increase human suffering, as we witnessed in the places where that notion was carried out. You know who would be a fan of defunding the police? Drug cartels, rapists, murderers, thieves. That idea was a function of the secular world. People become stupid the further we depart from that book that everyone laughs at, the Bible, the further we depart from the wisdom in that book. So to vindicate G.K. Chesterton's line, here are some more of the absurdities that people believe today. Men give birth. It's fair for biological men to compete against women in women's sports. Latinx. Defund the police. Racial segregation, only this time, it's good. Systemic racism. No free speech for hate speech. Men don't give birth. If men give birth, why are we only just finding out about this? Why didn't all the brilliant scientists and doctors of all of human history ever pick up on this minor detail? Men don't give birth. What you mean to say is trans men give birth. And if that's what you mean, say that. Be honest with your speech. What you're really saying is something that everyone has known forever. That is, women give birth. But this secular world has enabled us all to say such absurd things. Things that don't correlate to reality, yet are taken as fact. As indisputable facts. Trans itself is an absurdity. It is not a real ontological category of human being. It's made up. It is absolutely and so obviously unfair for biological men to compete against biological women. I resent even having to preface men and women with biological. So it's unfair, yet people go along with it. We witness and celebrate what was probably the worst of it that I saw. It was a biological man fighting, pummeling a woman. And he won. Duh. And we're celebrating that. We're sitting and watching this on TV or in person, and we're celebrating this man beat a woman. Latinx. Yeah, as if Latinos in Colombia or Argentina are using that stupid word to refer to themselves. Why are you trying to strip their culture away? Why are you trying to change their language? Diversity and inclusivity. Ugh. How about this fun one? The West's reversion to racial segregation. I remember reading about the University of Columbia having an all-black dorm. What was even crazier was that if you opposed all-black dorms, you were the racist. You know who is in favor of all-black dormitories? The KKK. The color of my skin tells you nothing about me. Nothing important. It doesn't tell you if I'm smart or stupid. It doesn't tell you if I'm kind or cruel. It doesn't tell you about my passions, about my pains. It tells you nothing. Is America, or the West generally, systemically racist? Well, let me put it to you like this. No Jews moved to Germany in the 1930s. Is America systemically racist? If so, why have 3 million Africans and Caribbeans in the last few decades moved to America? Are they stupid? And free speech. Many people will say, many young people, because they're pressured into thinking this way, many people will say that they believe in free speech, but they don't believe in free speech for hate speech. They don't realize the foolishness of that belief. If you don't believe in free speech for hate speech, you don't believe in free speech. Because who determines what hate speech is? You. You don't believe in free speech. You believe your opinion and your feelings dictate how a person should speak. Moving on. I've made this argument before, usually when speaking to atheists in the conversations around morality and whatnot. If there is no God, there is no meaning. If there is no God who created the human being, who cares for the human being, there is no ultimate meaning. We are all just coincidences. We are gene machines. We are formalized goo. And then we die. We cease. Who cares? Here for the blink of an eye, no rhyme nor reason. If there is no God, that is, the God of the Bible, if there is no God who created us, then there is no ultimate meaning to life. You can make up meaning. It's called existentialism. People have to make up meaning. You can't live your life without meaning. And some things we find meaning in are good. They're beautiful. You can find meaning in charity, in your family, in your work. But ultimately, there is no meaning. You're no different to an ant. And the desire for meaning is greater than any other desire we have. It's greater than even the sex drive. People voluntarily, or maybe involuntarily, don't have sex. But if they have meaning, they lead fulfilled, happy, successful lives. Well, they can. But you could have all the sex you could ever fantasize. But if you don't have meaning, you're miserable. Therefore, people seek meaning, even in the secular world. They make substitutes for religion. Humanism, feminism, scientism, Marxism, communism, socialism, environmentalism. They have a god. They're saving the earth. These are doctrinal substitutes for belief in God. Substitutes for the disappearance of the Judeo-Christian foundation. Secular extremism brings about the death of ultimate meaning. It's no wonder that depression and suicidality is at a record high, even among the youngest of us. Speaking of the youngest of us, let's talk about the death of human preciousness. The irony about secular humanism is that it doesn't do all that much for human beings. The Judeo-Christian world gave us the notion that every single human being is made in God's image. Every single person is of infinite worth, that you and I are infinitely precious. This is dying in the post-Christian world that we live in. A writer named Julian Baggini wrote in his book, Freedom Regained, according to the modern scientist, consciousness is just the noise made by the firings of neurons. That's all. Secularism dehumanizes us. I've told a story before about a friend of mine who echoed a similar kind of thing. We were talking about love, and he said that love is just a chemical reaction in the brain. And at the time, I knew he was wrong, but I didn't have the wisdom to explain why. Love is the product of firing neurons. Really? If the secular scenario is true, God didn't make us meaningless. Every passion, every love, every deep emotion, just firing neurons. It's just noise. You are a gene machine, as the famous religious scientist Richard Dawkins said. At least he's honest to his atheism. God wants us to be free. Human beings, though, we don't actually desire freedom as much as we claim. What we desire more is to be taken care of. When the Jews were freed from bondage in Egypt, and they were in the desert, and they were hungry, and God gave them manna from heaven, what did they say? We want to go back to Egypt. The food was so good. I mean, yeah, we were slaves, but oh my God, the food. That's a trade we make daily, whether with food or not. Just look at the past 3 years. The draconian lockdowns. Give me goodies, government, and I'll give you my freedom. Take this ouchie. And you can go on holiday, and you can go out to eat, and you can go into public spaces, and we'll give you your freedom back. What was interesting is that the more religious the country, the more rebellion and rejection of the lockdowns. The more secular the societies, like Australia, the more acceptance. Is that right? Secularism doesn't care about you. Should that be on a t-shirt? I'd wear it. If I could afford my own merch. God is the author of our rights. God is the author of our freedom. You get rid of God, you get rid of freedom. Freedom is something you fight for. Freedom comes at cost. That's why people claim they want freedom when really they prefer someone to take care of them. Because when someone takes care of you, you sit back, you let it happen. There's no work involved. Freedom is fought for. We're living through the consequences of secularism right now. And even though we're seeing the results of it, kids are still being taught that religion is for dummies, that the truly intelligent and intellectual elite reject God and they're so smart and wonderful and we want to be them. All the celebrities and the famous people, they all reject God even though they say his name. Who are they really talking about? No, you don't want to be religious. You don't want to believe in this God, this bearded man in the sky. That's how they see him. That's how they caricature God. That's how he's depicted. Not the creator of the human being. Not the lover of your soul. The one who has endowed us with worth and rights. What about art? We live in an era that celebrates and stands in awe of poo. Yep. Do you know how much scatological art there is, or there has been in the past 50 years? Scatological means referring to excretion, poop, urine, menstrual blood. One of the most famous of these. I'd rather not show you a picture, but it's a jar filled with urine, and there's a crucifix in it, inventively titled. This grotesque thing went from museum to museum, the most cherished symbol of Christendom, drowned in some guy's urine. Could you imagine if this artist doused an illustration of Muhammad in urine? No way. Absolutely no way. You know why? It's not because Christianity is weak. On the contrary, it is because these anti-religious activists are cowards, total cowards. They pick on Christians because they know we will not hurt them, because we believe all life is precious and every human being has been made in God's image. And we are responsible for upholding that intrinsic worth and dignity, even when others do not. They are not anti-religious. They're anti-Christ. They're mad at their dad. In the modern secular West, ugly is beautiful. Without God, there is nothing for an artist to elevate us toward. I've been listening to a lot of classical music recently. Don't know why, just happened. And I'm telling you, it hits different. When that's on in my headphones, my life is like a movie. Bach wrote "For the Glory of God" on the manuscript of every piece of music he produced. People used to write music, they used to create art to elevate the human spirit, because there's something to be elevated toward, to God. For the glory of God. No God, no elevation. We have factory farmed music, boring themes, and everything is explicit. No imagination, no poetry, no wit. There is no creative development, there's no creativity in a society that believes there is no God, that there is nothing beyond the physical. Everything you create will appeal to the lowest appetites of the flesh. The purpose of art, the purpose of creating, the purpose of inventing, or at least the best of those, serve to elevate the human spirit toward God. It serves to transcend the physical, to set our minds on the non-physical, on the heavenlies. That's why it is so valuable in society. What's being pumped out by the entertainment industry? What are they making? Nothing. They're rewriting Roald Dahl books and other classics. They're turning everything into woke garbage. Why? For who? Who is this appealing to? No one. It's political virtue signaling nonsense. Empty in music. Boring in art. Sterile in architecture. What's to be said now of virtue? The education system is so poor, and has been so poor, that people don't even understand logic. If there is no God who says don't murder, murder isn't wrong. That doesn't mean that atheists will necessarily murder and that Christians will never murder. You can think murder is wrong, you can feel that murder is wrong. But if there is no God, it is just your opinion. Murder isn't objectively wrong. There is no objective moral truth if there is no God. Logic. When you believe that there is no objective moral truth to the world, when you believe that there is no God telling you this is wrong, don't do this, that's when you start robbing children of their sexual innocence, because you become the author of morality. Those who hold power, they become the arbiters of moral truth and execution. You might argue that, well, people have a conscience. Yeah. You, Lenin, Mao, Saddam, Hitler, and me. It's amazing how much evil can be done with a clear conscience. The conscience isn't a terribly powerful thing. Less so when you have nothing, no objective standard, no God to align your conscience with. Remember the BLM riots? Or in London, you remember when Brixton was up in flames and people were looting stuff? Groups of young people smashing in the windows of stores. And in the case of BLM riots, brutally pummeling innocent people in the street, sometimes to death. You think these people believe God exists? You think they believe that God told them individually, this young man, this young woman, don't steal, don't murder, love your neighbor. And just a quick note on happiness. I'm not sure I care all that much about happiness, don't get me wrong. I, like everyone, want to be happy, sure. But I think of happiness in the same way I think of other states of mind or emotions. Comes and goes. Shouldn't rule you either way. However, people want to be happy. And it's not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with wanting happiness. Actively religious people are more happy than secular people. Look it up. Now, the secular among you may say, well, yeah, of course Christians are happier. They have God. They have this crutch. They're afraid to face reality. So, yeah, they're happy in their ignorance. Funny that when someone breaks their ankle, we all certainly agree that that person needs a crutch in order to heal and walk again. It's obvious. It would be cruel to deny them that, or to make fun of them because of it. Maybe, if you would just look around at the world today, maybe you'll see that maybe we have a broken temperament. Maybe we have a broken spirit. Maybe there is something wrong with our nature. We need meaning, that's for sure. Religion gives us that. Secularism gives us none of that. And that's a big problem because happiness is important. Religious belief is associated with lower rates of suicide, enhanced social support, less substance abuse, lower rates of psychopathology. That's all. That's all religion gives you. Who needs it? Doesn't mean the Judeo-Christian worldview is true. It means that one consequence of the death of this worldview is depressed people who want to end their lives. It ties in with the meaning stuff. If you tell me that you go to church because you're less likely to want to end your life, hey man, I will see you next week and the week after that and so on. Keep coming, because you should live. Life is a gift. Your life is precious. You don't need to have a road to Damascus experience. Maybe you will. Maybe you'll discover God when you attend or study the Bible. Whatever. Either way, the benefits are staggering. People are brainwashed into thinking religion is awful and it's for dum-dums. But when you actually just take a step back, consider all these things, religion would be the first thing you advocate if you are pro-human, if you are anti-depression. But if you still think leading a secular life is a good idea, I have to conclude, you leave me no choice, but to conclude that the reason you reject religion is emotional. It is not rational. Maybe you have some anger or hostility towards religion because of something that happened in the past, something you're struggling to overcome. Fine, fair enough. But don't let it cloud your vision for too long. Or maybe you've just been successfully brainwashed into believing that religion is for idiots, that you are above religion, that you don't need it. You do. You need God like the injured need a crutch. And finally, where do you get your wisdom? If you don't get your wisdom from the Bible, where do you get it? Probably the most common response would be life experience. That is a hilariously unwise answer. What if you don't have a lot of life experience? Does that make you a fool? If that's true, why are we allowing kids to make permanent medical, surgical decisions about their body? What life experience do they have? Why do we allow 18-year-olds to vote? Maybe we should only let 30-year-olds and above vote. Imagine every child learned this one thing, that the strongest I can be is to be strong enough to conquer my own appetites. Imagine that, to conquer my own base instincts. Imagine what a powerful generation, what a healthy generation we would set out into the world. This is the kind of thing traditional Christianity and Judaism teach their kids. But in secular school, what are you taught? Who are you taught to fight? You might say, well, they're taught to fight, the man. They're taught to fight society. No, they're not. They're taught to fight their parents. They're taught to fight God. They're taught to fight whoever society tells them to fight. They're taught to love government. They're taught to love institutions. They're taught to be lovers of self. We all would benefit. We all do benefit when we understand that deeply Judeo-Christian belief of self-denial, because we all have to fight our laziness. You have to fight your ego. What else does secularism teach you? Follow your heart. Christian and Jewish children are taught repeatedly that the heart is deceptive, that it is deceitful. Don't follow it. Secularism says follow your heart. I can't think of a worse piece of advice. If your goal is to be a good, healthy, mature person. Follow what is good Follow what is right. Very rarely stuff that comes from your heart. If our heart only told us to do the right thing, we wouldn't need values. We wouldn't need law. Don't follow your heart. Your heart is an irba. So, we are living in a world of nonsense. That's the conclusion. It's not all doom and gloom, but it's pretty gloomy, man. Everything's subjective. You are what you think you are, even when you're 2 years old and you think you're a cat. We're witnessing the breakdown of the West, and it's happening parallel to the rejection of the God of the Bible. There is no secular solution to evil, and evil is rampant in the world. Not just the West. We need God. We need God who says, be and do good. You know the famous line from scripture, love your neighbor as yourself. That's not the line. The line is, love your neighbor as yourself. I am God. If God doesn't say love your neighbor, it doesn't mean a thing. It's just a suggestion. It is very hard to make people good. It's very hard, therefore, to make a good world. But love your neighbor as yourself. I am God. That's the way to do it. We know the consequences of religious extremism, though we conflate all religions together. In reality, Christian extremism isn't bad. We also know the consequences of secular extremism, whether we've recognized it or not. We're living in it. We have been for decades. Secular extremism is a real danger to everything valuable about the Western world. We should care about that. When you tear a flower from the soil that nurtures it, it dies. We are tearing flowers out of the Judeo-Christian soil. We must return to our roots. It is the only weapon against the mutilation of children. It is the only weapon against racial segregation, against all the absurdities and dangers presented to us, and in some cases forced upon us, by the secular world, by secular extremism. This return is otherwise known, or traditionally known, as repentance, a concept scarcely encouraged, a word scarcely used in modern culture, sometimes even scarce in addresses to church. The God of the Bible is the basis. It is the fundamental good of Western civilization. All you need to be is intellectually honest to see this, all of this. This has not been an argument for you to believe in the God of the Bible, only an argument for you to understand what happens when you remove the God of the Bible from people's consciences. The human condition is decrepit without belief in God. Even if you do not believe in him, act as though he exists. Act as though the 10 Commandments apply. Get everyone to live by the 10 Commandments, then you can defund the police. Look to God. That's where wisdom is. That's where happiness is. That is where creativity is. That is where virtue is. That is where meaning is found. For the glory of God. Peace out, laters.